before I start into our lesson, I want to talk. Thursday nights, we're just getting started again in Genesis, and it promises to be a good 7 years. Looking forward, if that's what it takes us to get through it again. Worth every moment. And if you've not been joining us, now is a really good time to jump in to do those things. So
it won't take us 7 years to cover Genesis.
It won't take 7 years for Genesis, Lee promises. So okay, it'll seem like moments, I'm sure. Okay, there's a song from the early '70s that asks a couple questions about the reason for our existence. I'm going to start off with that. The first two lines, I'll show them to you up here. How is it we are here on this path we walk, in this world of pointless fear, filled with empty talk? Am I the only one that recognizes that? Does anybody else recognize it? Mindy's kind of smiling back there. It's in the back of her mind somewhere. So, but for the committed atheists, when they see this question, how is it we are here? It absolutely means nothing to them whatsoever. It's a pointless exercise for them to even think about that, because they just seem to think that there's no foundational reason for anything. That life and existence are just the outcome of unguided processes, happenstance, that sort of thing. And so that would mean no goal is possible, because there's no plan that was ever put in place. With no plan, you can't have a goal. And no ultimate reason for anything. And if you've ever spent any time talking to a committed atheist, they're one of the most depressing people in the world to speak to for that reason, because they, in their situation, they really have no hope, nothing to look forward to at all. The great abyss, like we were just saying about a few minutes ago. For the believer, on the other hand, though, the question is worth asking, okay? Because, it's and trying to answer it too, not just asking it, but trying to find the answer to it, because we come to understand that God exists. God created everything. God has a plan. He has a purpose in mind, and He's given us a role and a responsibility to fulfill in the process of carrying out what His purpose is for us. The second line kind of sets the stage for the type of world that we actually live in. Lee just kind of mentioned something along these lines a minute ago, but in this world of pointless fear, filled with empty talk. Okay. Years ago, Michael Crichton, a fellow named Michael Crichton, wrote a book called The Andromeda Strain. Some of you have heard of it. There was a movie made into it, and it's about a extraterrestrial microbe that finds its way to Earth and infects people and kills them within 2 minutes. And kind of an interesting bit of fiction. Later on, near the end of his life, he wrote a book called State of Fear that's also an interesting read. Can't really recommend it because of a couple things in there, but it's about the tendency of the modern media to jump around from one supposed calamity to the next, okay, to keep us in a constant state of worry. And so they'll talk about global warming for a while, and then they'll talk about the fires in the Amazon. And of course, almost everything can relate back to global warming if you try hard enough. But we're always meant to be kind of on the edge of our seats and worried about absolutely everything. We used to take the Watertown Daily Times in print, and I think 5 days a week out of the 7, you open that first page, and on A2 at the bottom there's a story about global warming. It was always there. Somebody said, if you want to be cured of reading the newspaper, hang on to it for a week and read it then, and see how much of it really needed to be paid attention to. And after I read that, I kind of started doing that just a little bit, not real formally, but it will cure you of reading the newspaper, because so much of there is just talking about pointless fear. And for empty talk, if you've got a television in your house, I don't recommend that you do this, but you could turn it on to some of the talk shows in the afternoon, and you see things like Oprah and Maury and Judge Judy and Ellen the Degenerate and all these other things that are out there. Okay, yeah. And they are living proof that not every idea has equal value. Okay, it's a lot of empty talk out there. If you don't have a television, you are a long way ahead of the game in this thing here. So, but this is the words of the first couple lines from this song. It's always been one of those songs that kind of hung around with me a little bit, and because it asked some pretty good questions. And we're gonna talk about this question, but we're going to talk about it in a little bit of an indirect manner and talk around it, and then we'll get back to it near the end. But we're going to talk about it by asking this question right here. What have you done with your Mina, or Mina, or Mina? And I'm not sure which of those is the right pronunciation. And Rhonda and I kind of went around to this, and I looked at this source and this source and this source, and they all seem to agree it's one of those pronunciations. I don't know anybody that actually speaks Hebrew or Greek. I guess it's a Greek word that could tell us. Somebody probably knows out there. So it could be Mina, like in Mina bird. It could be Mina, as in what we hear when we say minimum. Mina, I can't think of any sort of thing that works for us in the English language for Mina. The difficulty with it is that there was a Mina out there in the Hebrew language that is a measure of weight. And these other things, money used to actually be weighed back in the days when money was money instead of just currency. And so weights were very, very important because a weight of silver meant something, a weight of gold meant something. But anyway, we're going to talk about, I will use either Mina or Mina. I try not to use Mina because that doesn't roll off my tongue very well. I suspect that Mina might be the right answer. We will talk about that. First, Garrett kindly read for us the parable of the talents from Matthew 25. I asked him to read that, and because the parable that we're going to get into, the parable of the Mina, or actually it's not the Mina, but the 10 minutes, we'll get to it, is similar to that, told very near in time to one another. There's enough differences between the two of them that I don't think it's the same event, but two different tellings. But we're going to study the second one. It's in Luke 19, so you can be turning there. And as you turn there, why study the parables of Jesus? Well, Jesus is the master. Everything he said has value. All Scripture is God-breathed, right? Inspired by God, profitable for teaching, instruction, reproof, correction, training in righteousness. There's a verse that Leah mentioned Thursday night. So sometimes the lessons in the parables are often just implied lessons. And we need to make sure we drag the right meaning out of them and don't put something in there that is not there. Both the parable of the talents in Matthew 25 and of the minas in Luke 19 really teach the same thing in an underlying way. So we really only need to deal with kind of the one of them. So as we go through this, I'll read it through, and then we'll go back and we'll look at the characters, and we'll look at the parable again, and then we'll look at the lessons that we can learn from the parable. So let's go to Luke 19. I've got a New American Standard. We're going to start in verse 11. My little heading there says the parable of money usage. Maybe, maybe not. While they were listening to these things, and this is right after, this is while he's at dinner with Zacchaeus. Okay, that's the setting. While they were listening to these things, he went on to tell a parable because he was near Jerusalem and they supposed that the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. He said, therefore, a certain nobleman went to a distant country to receive a kingdom for himself and then return. And he called 10 of his slaves and gave them 10 minas and said to them, do business with this until I come back. But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. And it came about that when he returned, after receiving the kingdom, he ordered that these slaves, to whom he had given the money, be called to him in order that he might know what business they had done. And the first appeared, saying, Master, your mina has made 10 minas more. And he said to him, well done, good slave, because you have been faithful in a very little thing, be in authority over 10 cities. And the second came, saying, your mina master has made 5 minas. And he said to him also, and you are to be over 5 cities. Another came, saying, Master, behold your mina, which I kept put away in a handkerchief. For I was afraid of you, because you're an exacting man. You take up what you did not lay down, and reap what you did not sow. He said to him, by your own words I will judge you, you worthless slave. Did you know that I'm an exacting man, taking up what I did not lay down, or reaping what I did not sow? Then why did you not put the money in the bank, and having come, I would have collected it with interest? And he said to the bystanders, "Take the mina away from him. Give to the one who has the 10 minas." And they said to him, "Master, he has 10 minas already." "I tell you that to everyone who has shall more be given. But the one who does not have, even what he does have, shall be taken away. But these enemies of mine, who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slay them in my presence." And so, as we go through this, the context again is dinner with Zacchaeus. This is on his way into Jerusalem, and he's nearing Jerusalem shortly before his death. So this is pretty much near the end of his ministry. Why did Jesus speak in parables? Sometimes things were a little bit hard to understand, and he needed to tell them a story that on its face, superficially, made sense. But then those that were interested, it would engage their minds and think and try to find the deeper meaning. And that's kind of why we get the idea that the definition of a parable, earthly story with a heavenly meaning. So he's using the parable to teach this story. The characters. I know I've got Mina down there as a character. It's not really a character, but this is where it fit, okay? So, first of these is the nobleman. But then the slave, citizens, and the mina. And the nobleman is called a nobleman in pretty much every translation I had, except for one. Young's literal translation calls it a man of birth. Isn't every man a man of birth? I think they are. Every woman's a woman of birth too, but the word itself is really only used 3 times in the New Testament. This is one of them. Another one is 1 Corinthians 1:26, and you'll recognize this verse, I think. "For consider your calling, brethren, that there were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble." Then it goes on. I think he's teaching there that among the Christians, you don't see a whole lot of powerful people that are part of Christianity. You don't see a lot of royal people that are Christians. You don't see a lot of real mighty people necessarily in the church. People that the world would consider wise or worldly or powerful or royal. But remember, God's not a respecter of persons, right? Peter finally understands this in Acts 10 with Cornelius. Peter realizes that God does not play favorites based on a person's ethnicity or their rank. Instead, in every nation, the man who fears him and does what's right is welcome to him. Okay, I think that's what's being taught about there in terms of talking about a noble person. And then the Bereans. The thing about the Bereans being more noble-minded, okay? The Greek word there has something to do with eugenesis, kind of where we get our word for genetics. Okay, so the idea is this is a person who was highly born, very well born, had good genes. The idea is he's a nobleman. Okay, has he become a king yet? Not yet. That's part of what the story is about. But they've what the nobleman has done here is that he has directed his slaves to take some of his resources and engage in business while he is away receiving his kingdom. So another thing we kind of know about him, he's a capitalist, isn't he? Those filthy capitalists, right? That's the story we hear from that empty talk in the media. So he also is providing his slaves with the resources that they need to carry out his wishes. He's not an unfair man. Okay? That's kind of another thing that we learn from the things here about him. The slaves, they were slaves. Okay, that much is pretty obvious. So the word doulos means a servant or a bond servant. The position is one of basically being owned by another person, and kind of like property. They're under bondage. Okay? It can be involuntary. You can be born into slavery. Your parents were slaves. You're born. You're also a slave of the master. There's also the idea of a voluntary slavery. Okay? You might enslave yourself to a person out of economic necessity, and so that possibility is also out there. That's described in Deuteronomy 15, by the way. I don't know if I will get back to that near the end of the lesson or not, but it's worth reading that passage there about the person that does that. This type of slave is different from a hired servant. The Greek word for a hired servant is Misthotos, something like that, a hireling. Okay. Sometimes if you hire somebody to do some work for you, that's the position that they're in. Okay. If your slave does not do a very good job, what can you do? You can punish the slave, but you're stuck with the slave because you're the owner. If your hired man doesn't do the job you want, you can always fire the hired man. Okay, so there you have a little bit more of a motivation to do the right thing for you. I was telling Stephen Azzola yesterday, I've got a big stack of wood that I got from Marcus right before he moved. Bunch of oak. And I've had it in one part of the house, another part of the house, another part of the house, moved it around a bunch of times and everything else. Well, we're running out of space. And so I hired my 2 Amish neighbors to come up. Hey, stack that stuff down in the basement for me. They did a good job. You go down in the basement, the longest stuff is on the bottom, the shortest stuff is on the top. The front edge of the thing looks like they used a straight edge to put it in line. It's beautiful. I don't want to move it now. Okay? There's only 3 pieces of wood that's been used out of it. Jonathan used 2 and Nick used 1. I haven't even gotten to it yet. So how long has he been gone? 2 years? It's been a long time. It's been a long time. So if you need any oak, see me afterwards. But do they want to be hired again, the Amish folks? Do they want me to hire them again? They did really good work. Okay, you think I'm going to ignore them next time I need something done? No. I'll ask them to come in again and do whatever again. I knew I could trust them. Okay, that's what the hireling does if he wants his wages. If he wants his wages to continue. So those are the differences. If you're in the military, those of you that have been in the military or in right now, you understand the big difference between those two, right? Because the doulos, the bondservant, that's a lot closer to the position that you're in than is the one over here, the hireling. I get to quit my job tomorrow if I want to. Okay. Garrett and I were texting back and forth just a little bit yesterday, and I happened to notice an older text of his on a Sunday morning, and it said, something came up. I can't make it today. I appreciate getting the note, so I know that he's okay. But I also know that he's closer to that doulos, that bondservant thing, because of the way the military is structured, and has to be structured in all likelihood. So, okay, we've got the citizens. Some of the translations just call it townsmen. It's when I read citizen, I kind of think more of a countrywide sort of thing. I think the situation at the beginning here is more of a city sort of thing, which is where citizen actually came from anyway. But the nobleman seems to have some sort of authority over them, because in verse 14 they're called his citizens. But his realm of influence seems to be a fairly limited sort of thing, and we will talk more about that. But they hated him. They hated this guy. In fact, the word behind it is really detest, which almost even sounds worse than hatred to me. And they sent a delegation after him. And the New American Standard says, we do not want this man to reign over us. The New King James, if you've got it, we will not have this man to rule over us. That sounds even a little bit more defiant, doesn't it? I don't know which of those is more accurate, but in the end, it's not going to matter for them. So, and then the Mina is a Greek monetary unit. Okay, a drachma is about a day's wage. Okay, sometimes we read in the Bible about a denarius. A denarius was also about a day's wage. Denarius is the Roman denomination. The drachma is a Greek denomination, and it took 100 drachmas, 100 days' wages, to make a mina. So it's not an insubstantial amount of money. 100 days' wages, that's 3 to 4 months of work. Okay, and he's leaving 10 of these, one with each of his servants, so that they can do what he has told them to do. It's definitely an amount of seed money that you can do something with. It's not a day's wage, 100 days' wages. So. Okay, so the story, we'll kind of review very, very quickly again. He's going off to a different country to be made the king. Before he leaves each of his 10 slaves a mina to invest, conduct business, make a profit. And the implication is that when I get back, we'll sit down and we'll see how it went for you. The current citizens didn't like him or respect him. They wanted to be certain he understood. They rejected him. I mean, they sent a delegation out. It's one thing to dislike your leader. It's another thing to, get a group of people together and go after him and say, hey, we don't want you to come back. Okay, they're really being in his face about it. When he finally does return, he calls his slaves before him to give the accounting, and eventually the citizens who rejected his authority were gathered together and killed. And that make you uncomfortable? That last little bit kind of sounds pretty harsh, doesn't it? And it is harsh to our mind and our way of thinking and everything else, because we don't have a king here, secular king here. We've got a real king here, okay? We have a spiritual king. But if you think it's unfair, then the problem is that we don't understand, or you may not understand exactly what kind of an authority a king had over his subjects. Okay? Remember the story when David, okay, committed adultery with Bathsheba and sent a note off to Joab to put Uriah out at the front, okay, and then withdraw from him. David knew very good and well that it meant that Uriah was going to be killed. Who else knew it? Joab. You remember that part where Joab sent the note back saying, hey, you can't do that? That's not there, is it? Why not? Because Joab knew that David, as the king, had the authority to do that. Okay? Solomon had his half-brother killed for trying to usurp the throne. Adonijah, is that his name? Adonijah. Okay, had him killed. You remember the guy going off to kill him, saying, hey, you can't do that? It didn't happen, did it? Because Solomon had the authority. In fact, Solomon sat in front of two women arguing over a baby and ordered the baby cut in half. Didn't happen. But it would have. Okay? He used that to figure out who the legitimate mother was. Okay? But nobody questioned his right to do that as king. And that's what we have to understand about what a king can do. And it didn't just stop in antiquity. Okay? Henry VIII, ever hear of him? Okay? And the world is much more full with constitutional monarchies, kings that have their authority limited nowadays than back then. But now we've got despots and dictators in their spots that do this very thing to this day. Okay? Some of them we are able to get out of their countries and take care of them, and some of them we are not. But there are people today who do just that very thing, is take someone's life. So, I was thinking about Lee when I made this next bullet here. The parallel points of the parable. What does the parallel? What does the parable represent? Okay, there are parallels for each of these things. So the nobleman obviously represents Jesus. I think that's pretty clear, isn't it? Jesus is going away to a distant place to be crowned king, and is going to return just like the nobleman did. Jesus is absolutely worthy of the honor and the authority that's going to be given to him, or has now been given to him. Read Revelation 5 to understand more about that. The slaves, I think, represent Christians, followers, those that would, people who are called Christians. And when I say called Christians, what I mean to convey in using those words is people that the Lord would call Christians. The ones that he would say, those are my followers right there, because he is going to say that someday. Okay? It's the one that he recognizes. They've entered a covenant relationship with God. Okay? They do his will. They accept his teaching. They're faithful to their tasks. Those are the people that we're talking about. Notice that the slaves kind of retained the choice of doing the master's will or not. Okay? Some of them engaged in business, as they were told. 7 of them we don't know anything about. Okay, so much. And the first one went out and he increased his investment 10 times. That's quite the return. In the story of the talents, the guy who had 5 made 5. The guy who had 2 made 2. So they each had 100% return. In this story of the Minas, the first fellow took 1 and turned it into 10. That's 1,000% return. The next guy came back with 5. That's a 500% return. Okay, so they were given different amounts or the same amount had different returns. In the story of the talents, they had different amounts and had the same percentage return. not really relevant to anything. It'd be nice to know what happened to the other 7 slaves, but I guess Jesus didn't think that was all that important. There were 2 categories here that he was aiming for. But the worthless slave in verse 22 does nothing with the value of that minute except for safeguard it. Now, it's good to safeguard the master's property, but that wasn't the master's direction, was it? It was to go out and do something with it. So when I get back, we will talk again. And he even seems to be willing to have accepted just simple interest. Hey, if you'd have taken it to the bank, he would have been pleased with that. Each of these fellows that went out, each of these 10, you have to assume they saw some sort of opportunity in front of them. Oh, I could do this. Let me try that. Oh, I could do this. Well, apparently the good returns were kind of taken, and maybe the last guy gets down and says, I don't see much opportunity out there. I'll put it in a handkerchief. Not good. He could have said, at least said, I'll take it to the bank. And I think the master would have been happy. But the slaves are Christians. I think they represent Christians in the story. The citizens, I think in the story they represent men in every nation that reject Jesus. People who will not recognize his authority under any circumstance while they're alive on this earth. While they're alive on this earth. Okay? Every knee will bow. They will accept that authority someday. I think it also includes those that pretend to accept his authority, but don't accept his teaching. Okay? There are some people out there who teach things different than what Jesus teaches. In John 14:6, Jesus told Thomas, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Okay? If you ever hear anybody who claims to be a Christian claiming that a Muslim can go to heaven by just being a Muslim, they are rejecting what Jesus teaches. They're rejecting it. Okay? They're saying what Jesus said is not true, that they believe something else. I would not put them in a category of being a Christian. Okay? I don't see how we could when they teach something different. And so it doesn't matter if you have T-shirts with Bible verses on them. Okay? It doesn't matter if you carry your Bible in your pocket everywhere you go. Those outward things don't matter so much. In the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7, Jesus says, many will say to me, Lord, Lord. Okay? In other words, they're calling themselves Christians. But Jesus declares to them, I never knew you. I never knew you. So the claim to be a Christian is not sufficient proof of you being a Christian. Instead, it's the will of my Father who is in heaven. That's what Jesus says in Matthew 7:21. Okay. Let's get to the Mina. Talents and resources that God gives us to do the work. I think that's the parallel there. Anything you are provided that God expects to grow at your hands and with your effort. There are examples kind of all over the place. The immediate thing here is a financial sort of thing. Okay. There are financial resources that God has blessed us with. He expects us to do something with those to further his kingdom. That, I think, is clear from the parable. How about our lives and the time, the way we spend our time? God has given us our lives. Okay? We could not have been born without God's involvement in things. That's the miracle of life. He put us on this earth in the time that we're here, okay? And he expects a return on that investment. There are some people in this world that were put here by God that are going to, devote themselves to secular hedonism at every turn. They're always going to pursue a path that is against what God has asked. Paul describes them in Romans 1 really, really well. You can see how they are. And so, because that's not the return God is looking for, God is going to turn them over to degrading passions. Is I think the phrase that Paul uses there. Out of his servants, though, what does he expect? A lot of good things. Okay, the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Okay? Those are the sorts of things that God expects us to improve in our lives. And that gets us to the question of how we're going to spend our lives. And you've all heard that phrase before. Have you ever thought about it before? How are you going to spend your life? We spend money to acquire something, okay? When we spend our lives, we're spending time. We're spending our time. We're going to spend that time in God's service, or we're going to spend that time doing something else. There's only one we're going to be able to defend in the end, and that's the thing that we need to keep in mind. Mercy. God's granted us mercy and forgiveness. Right? How do we take what He has given us and turn it into something bigger? By showing mercy and forgiveness to those that are around us, those that do things against us. Okay? We have that obligation. Remember in Matthew 18, the parable of the unmerciful servant. That's one that, boy, that always gets me mad. You know, this guy's forgiven so much money. It's like 200,000 years labor or something thing. And he won't forgive his own servant of a pittance. Okay? That is such a clear parable. James 2:13, judgment will be merciless to the one who shows no mercy. Boy, remember that one. Every time the opportunity arrives, remember that one. It's the idea of showing pity on somebody who needs help, right? The Good Samaritan, that's the story about mercy. That's the example that we are supposed to follow. So we can add grace and love, dozens of other ways that God has blessed us. In fact, really God has endowed us, okay, given us a deposit of good things that He means for us to use in the service of others. And I want to try to sum this up graphically, because this is kind of the way I think about it. This is just a chart, not really a chart even, just a picture that kind of shows all of our abilities. Okay, some are in the green, some are in the red. The green is our comfort zone. Okay? You know what the red is. Our discomfort zone, not our comfort zone. But notice that they are both within our ability. We're able to do those things that are outside of our comfort zone, that are over there. And God wants us to be doing the things that are over there. It's called growth. Okay? He wants us to grow. And so He's going to do what He can to kind of drag that black line over so that years down the road from the first picture, we have more things that are in our comfort zone. Okay? Fewer things that are outside of our comfort zone. But all of these things are well within our abilities. Okay? Lee has assured me years ago that his ability to lead singing is outside of the comfort zone, outside of his Mina, and he's not going to do that. Okay? And I'll take him at his word and appreciate that. And luckily we have other song leaders. Okay? But this endowment, okay, this gift that God has given us is different for every one of us. There are different items in those. And the things that are in yours, I have no idea, okay, what those things are for you. I know what they are for me. And I can see people struggle with certain things, okay? But the point is that we ought to be growing and growing, and God wants more growth, okay? And the question is, what's behind that growth? If we can peel that growth away, what's it look like? Pain. It looks like pain. Okay? Not necessarily physical pain. Okay? But it's almost always some sort of emotional pain of having to stretch outside the things that you are comfortable with and do the things that you are uncomfortable with. Okay? If you've got kids that are getting ready to be teens, there are going to be times when they come to you and complain, my elbow hurts. Both my elbows hurt. My knees hurt too. And my hips hurt. And they're still in their teens. If they're old like me, then there are other reasons for those things, okay? But what's going on with them? They're hitting a growth spurt, okay? And their bones are, they're doing this stuff and everything else. And they start running into doorways and tripping down stairs, and they're clumsy and everything else because of this growth spurt that they're going through. It's painful to go through those things. Okay? I kind of go to this boys' camp. And one of the things we do is let the boys take turns standing up, leading, singing. Okay? Some of these kids, in terms of the comfort zone, it's way over here. It's a piece of cake for them. For others, way at the other end. It's hard for them. Okay? And you can see it's painful to watch because you can see the amount of discomfort that they're going through to try to move that bar. Okay, so this is, I hope this helps. This is your Mina. Make your own list of what things are in the comfort zone. You guys, you know what these are. You know the things that are outside your comfort zone. And again, these are things that are within your abilities. All the things that are in the red part are things that are within our abilities, but we're not comfortable with yet. Okay? And God expects us to grow into those things. Okay. So I mentioned singing. Teaching can be there. Preaching can be there. Any of those things. And, for somebody who is, after a bunch of years, I'm comfortable singing. Okay, so that's back in the comfort zone for me at some point. It doesn't do me any good to see some young kid that is uncomfortable singing and say, hey, it's a piece of cake, don't worry about it, you get up there. That doesn't do me any good. I've never said that to a kid because I remember what it's like. Okay. And in terms of understanding this, be honest with yourself enough if you decide to sit down and make a list to recognize what are the things that you are doing now that you were not doing when you first became a Christian, and what are the things that you've not been willing to tackle as you have been, if it's been 20 years and you've made no progress. You need to be honest with yourself and say, look, I need to get back on the path here. Okay. Remember that line in the song, how is it we are here on this path we walk? We're on this path because we chose to get on that path. God said, here's the path. We volunteered to get on that path as Christians. Okay. Some of the lessons, in no particular order necessarily. Leaders have responsibilities. In the military especially, you understand that real well. If you're head of a family, you understand that. Okay? All of us fail at some of those at some point. The nobleman had responsibilities that he had to fulfill. He had to go receive a kingdom. Jesus had to go receive a kingdom. Did Jesus want to? Boy, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, Father, if there's any way, let this pass. But your will be done. We need to have the same attitude. You might think it'd be great to be a king, and it'd be easy to do that. We talked about the sword of Damocles maybe a year ago. Okay, the idea of a sword hanging over the king, that at a moment, calamity could befall. Okay, so it's not everything that you think it's cracked up to be. So Jesus, just as the nobleman returned as king, and he expects an accounting, Jesus is going to return and also expect an accounting. Because Jesus is going to pass judgment on us. Okay, the idea behind this, the parable is judgment day is coming. Another point, it's good and well to engage in business. There's nothing wrong with that. I kind of laughed a little bit earlier about him. Oh, he's a capitalist. And it's almost become a dirty word. It's not a dirty word. It's not a dirty word subject to the constraints that God has given. Okay? Can you become a capitalist and sin? Absolutely you can. Okay? But engaging in business with a view to prosper, there's nothing in the world wrong with that, so long as you do it subject to the Lord's constraints. And doing so, that's a part of life. It's not the point of life, though. Okay? Business is not the point of life. Doing business is a part of it, or maybe a part of it. And God expects a return on his investment. He's made an investment on us. He's given us abilities. He does not want us to let those abilities stagnate. And so we don't just safeguard the investment that God has given to us like the worthless slave did. We have to work to make it better. So, I guess I've got those. Okay, so at the start we talked about how is it we are here, why are we here? I'll tell you why we're here. God put us here. It is as simple as that. God put us here. You can read 1,000 books by atheists with all kinds of nonsense that they spout, and nothing in all 1,000 of those books will make as much sense as God put us here. That's it. God put us here. That's why we are here. How is it we're on the path we walk? I said it a minute ago. We chose to be on the path. We looked at the evidence and decided God is worth following. I will do that. Now let's go. Turn over to Deuteronomy 15. This is this is kind of an interesting section of the old law. Starting in verse 12. If your kinsman, a Hebrew man or woman, is sold to you, then he shall serve you 6 years, but in the 7th year you shall set him free. And when you set him free, you shall not send him away empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally from your flock and from your threshing floor and from your wine vat. You shall give to him as the Lord your God has blessed you. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you today. Therefore I command you this today. And it shall come about if he says to you, I will not go out from you because he loves you and your household, since he fares well with you. Then you shall take an awl and pierce it through his ear to the door, and he shall be your servant forever, and you also. And also you shall do likewise to your maidservant. Okay, this applies to both of them. Can you look at that? What do you see? I see Christianity right there in Deuteronomy 15. Okay? A slave that loves his master. That's what we're supposed to do on this path. Do we have pointless fears? Yes, we do. Get over it. Sorry, it's not as easy as that, but we get over those pointless fears. God can take care of us. Are we distracted by empty talk? Yes, we are. Ignore it and press on to do the things we're supposed to do. If we're going to answer that other question, what have you done with your Mina, then we have to consider the gifts that God has given us and use those gifts as a base from which we grow, okay, into doing things that really we never thought we would be comfortable with. It might be preaching or teaching. It might be psalm leading. It might be writing letters of encouragement to people who are sick. It might be doing Bible studies with people halfway across the world. It might be inviting people into your home, brethren or strangers or just whatever. If we will do those things and grow the way God wants us to grow, then we'll be the one that hears at the end, well done, good slave. And that's his desire. He wants to say those words to each one of us. So that's our lesson today. I hope you have a better understanding of what your Mina is. You don't have to share it with me, but you are to share it with everybody else. So if you're here today and you're not a Christian, you need to get on that path that was being talked about. Okay? The way on that path is to respond to the gospel, to understand that hey, God exists, his Son exists, to believe in Jesus, to understand that we've each sinned, and to repent of those sins, be immersed in water for the forgiveness of those sins, and to walk life as a Christian. If you are here in a Christian and you're distracted by worthless talk, empty talk, or pointless fears, whichever they go, then we encourage you to ask for the prayers and the help of the church so that we can help you walk the same path that we are all trying to walk. So, if any of those apply, please come forward. Let us know as we stand and sing our song.